Evelyn had always carried an undeniable charm, an enchanting presence that naturally drew attention wherever she went. But tonight, something felt different. The atmosphere seemed to buzz with an unseen energy, a subtle shift in the air that signaled a transformation, not just in the way others saw her, but in how she saw herself, and perhaps even in her marriage. The evening began with an air of effortless elegance as she and William entered the party, thrown by one of his college friends. The room hummed with laughter and chatter, the scent of fine whiskey mixing with expensive perfumes, creating an aura of relaxed indulgence. William introduced Evelyn to his friends, his arm possessively resting around her waist, his tone warm yet tinged with subtle ownership. But Evelyn couldn't ignore the way the men's gazes lingered on her, a hungry, almost predatory look that sent a shiver down her spine. Though she had drawn such attention before, tonight there was a certain intensity to it, an unspoken craving that stirred something within her. Then, with a casualness that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface, William made a remark that shifted the dynamic of the room. "Evelyn could charm anyone here," he said, his voice light yet laden with a suggestive undertone. A silent understanding passed between his friends, an unspoken challenge that hung heavily in the air. As the night unfolded and the whiskey flowed freely, the mood grew charged with a dangerous energy. Games that had once been innocent and playful took on a more suggestive edge, their banter laced with double meanings that made Evelyn's heart race. She found herself at the center of their attention, every movement scrutinized, the room buzzing with anticipation. It began with a simple dare, a playful challenge to kiss someone other than her husband. Evelyn's pulse quickened, the air thick with unspoken desires. But when she looked at William, she didn't see disapproval. Instead, she saw a challenge, a silent invitation that gave her the courage to act. The kiss was electric, a forbidden thrill that sent a jolt through her as her lips met another's. In that moment, a wave of excitement washed over her, awakening a dangerous curiosity within. The kiss set the stage for a descent into uncharted territory. The glances became bolder, the drinks flowed faster, and Evelyn felt her inhibitions beginning to slip away. The intoxicating thrill of the moment coursed through her veins, spurred on by the attention and the forbidden nature of the game. The dares escalated, each one pushing her further into a realm of sensuality and transgression she had never considered before. William's gaze never left her. It was intense, a mixture of possessiveness, jealousy, and something darker that she couldn't quite place. It was as though his silent observation fueled her audacity, urging her to push the boundaries even more. Under his watchful eyes, Evelyn allowed herself to be drawn deeper into the game, each dare more daring than the last, each action laced with forbidden intimacy. The room crackled with tension, the air thick with unspoken desires. The men watched her every move with rapt attention, their words growing bolder, their intentions more explicit. One of William's friends dared her to sit on his lap. Evelyn hesitated, feeling the weight of William's gaze upon her, but only for a moment. Then, with a defiant tilt of her chin, she complied, settling herself onto the man's lap, acutely aware of the ripple of excitement that coursed through the room. His hands rested on her hips, sending a shiver of both fear and exhilaration down her spine. The other men's gazes followed her every move, their words growing more suggestive, their intentions clearer. Evelyn's heart raced as she grasped the unspoken agreement that hung in the air. A line had been crossed, a boundary breached, and the thrill of transgression was intoxicating. Emboldened by the charged atmosphere, Evelyn's actions grew bolder, her inhibitions melting away with each passing dare. She reveled in the attention, the power she held over the men, the forbidden desires she ignited within them. She was the center of their universe, the object of their collective desire, and the rush of it all was intoxicating. Throughout it all, William remained a silent observer. His gaze was fixed on her, his expression unreadable, yet a hint of dark satisfaction played at the corners of his lips, as though he derived pleasure from her surrender to their game. The weight of his gaze, the unspoken tension between them, fueled her audacity, pushing her further into the depths of this forbidden world. Evelyn teetered on the edge, torn between the exhilaration of the moment and the fear of the consequences. but the allure of the forbidden was too strong to resist. As the night wore on, she surrendered completely, embracing the power and the danger of her transgression, venturing deeper into the shadows of desire. This was no longer a game, it was a descent into a realm of forbidden passions, a dangerous dance on the precipice of no return. The tension in the room thickened, a palpable electricity crackling in the air. Evelyn knew that whatever happened next would irrevocably alter the course of her life. It wasn't long after Evelyn took that first fateful step, kissing another man under William's watchful eye, that the night spiraled further out of control. William's friends, emboldened by her compliance, proposed a new game, one that went beyond mere words and playful dares. It was a game that required a deeper, more intimate, and more daring surrender. Their eyes glistened with a predatory hunger, a craving that Evelyn could sense deep within her, a blend of fear and exhilaration that made her heart race against her chest. The first challenge appeared deceptively simple: unbutton your blouse. Such a minor action, yet the intensity of their gazes, as though undressing her with their stares, made it feel like so much more. Evelyn paused, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the buttons, the silence amplifying the frantic pulse of her heart. William stood off to the side, his face unreadable, yet the darkness in his eyes was unmistakable. He wasn't going to intervene, not a word from him, and so Evelyn complied. One button at a time, she revealed herself to their insatiable looks, the warmth of their stares burning her skin. It was an agonizingly slow process. Each button undone felt like a step further into a forbidden abyss. When the final button came loose and her blouse parted, she could feel the collective breath drawn in, as if savoring the moment. But they weren't finished. Not by a long shot. Their focus was now entirely on Evelyn, the dares escalating, becoming more explicit and demanding. One of William's friends, the one with the confident grin and unyielding gaze, dared her to kiss him. It was a dare she had already encountered, but this time, the stakes were higher, the implications much deeper. This wasn't just a kiss. It was a declaration of her willingness to give in to their desires. The kiss lingered, electricity crackling between them, and Evelyn felt a surge of exhilaration, the thrill of breaking the rules, of defying the boundaries she once held sacred. The other men observed, their stares burning into her, feeding off the illicit display, the palpable tension that hung in the air. Then, like a dam breaking, the dares came quickly, each one pushing Evelyn deeper into a reality she hardly recognized. Acts she had never imagined herself doing, not even in her wildest fantasies, were now unfolding before her. The men, emboldened by her submission, began taking turns, their hands exploring her body with a boldness that left Evelyn breathless. A mixture of fear and exhilaration coursed through her veins, a dangerous cocktail of shame and excitement that she couldn't shake off. But what unsettled her the most, what made her heart tighten with a fear that went beyond simple desire, was William's silence. His tacit approval of the escalating situation, his ever-present shadow, his eyes fixed on her as his friends grew bolder with their liberties. He remained silent, his expression unreadable, a dark presence that fueled Evelyn's unease. His quiet acceptance, more than the escalating dares, slowly unraveled her. The game spiraled further, the men pushing the limits, their demands growing until Evelyn was asked to strip herself of all modesty, to expose herself entirely before their voracious stares. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest, urging her to resist to preserve her dignity, but a stronger force, an overpowering mix of fear and forbidden desire, propelled her forward. With trembling hands, she obeyed, her body bared and vulnerable under their collective gaze. A wave of shame washed over her, yet beneath it surged an unexpected thrill, a dangerous exhilaration that both terrified and excited her. Evelyn could feel their eyes tracing every curve, every contour of her exposed body. Their gazes consumed her, stripping her bare, reducing her to nothing more than an object of their shared desire. She had become a pawn in a twisted game, a prize in a power play orchestrated by her husband. William's friends took turns, each one growing more intimate, more possessive with their touches, and through it all, William remained a silent observer, his gaze unwavering, dark satisfaction hiding behind his eyes. Evelyn's mind raced, struggling to understand his motives, his quiet complicity in her humiliation. Why wasn't he stopping this? Why wasn't he pulling her out of this nightmare that had begun as a playful game? And then, with a clarity that cut through the haze of alcohol and arousal, the truth became clear. William was enjoying this. He reveled in her submission, in the degradation she was enduring at the hands of his friends. This was what he wanted, what he needed, to see her stripped of dignity, reduced to nothing more than an object of desire. The realization shattered something within her, a fragile trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship. This was no longer a game. It was a descent into a dark abyss, a terrifying plunge into a world of twisted desires and power dynamics. The night was far from over, and Evelyn knew with a sinking certainty that she was in far deeper than she had ever imagined. Whatever lay ahead would irrevocably change the course of her life. There's a limit, a boundary to how far someone can be pushed, a moment when the mind, if not the body, rebels, refusing to go any further. But Evelyn had surpassed that limit long ago, her will crumbling under the weight of the night's offenses. The games, the dares, had evolved into something far more sinister, an unhealthy exploration of dominance and submission that far exceeded playful curiosity. And it wasn't over yet. A heavy silence enveloped the room, thick with anticipation and a palpable sense of dread. Then, one of William's friends, the one who seemed to take pleasure in pushing limits, issued a dare that reverberated through the group. He dared Evelyn to take him into her mouth, the words hanging in the air, dripping with vulgarity and an intense, primal hunger. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. All eyes turned to Evelyn, their gazes burning into her, waiting for her response. Evelyn paused, the weight of the dare pressing heavily on her. This was different, deeper, a more intimate violation than anything before. Her eyes flickered toward William, searching for a sign of disapproval, a glimmer of protectiveness that might pull her back from the edge. But all she received was a silent nod, a subtle encouragement that sealed her fate. William, her husband, the man who had vowed to love and protect her, was giving her permission to debase herself even further. A wave of nausea swept over her, but it was quickly replaced by an odd mixture of shame and forbidden excitement. Trembling, Evelyn knelt before the man, her heart pounding violently. She felt their eyes on her, the weight of their collective gaze searing into her skin. The room held its breath, a silent audience to this act of degradation, a spectacle both sacred and profane. As she performed the act, the atmosphere shifted again. The playful banter that had once filled the air was replaced by an intense, dangerous undercurrent, crackling with unspoken desires. The men watched, their eyes filled with lust and a possessive hunger, reveling in the power they had over her. One by one, they took their turns, each man claiming his prize, with Evelyn becoming a vessel for their collective desires. Her mind detached from her body. She floated above the scene, a passive observer to her own degradation. There was no room for thought, no space for resistance, only the primal act itself and the reactions it elicited from the men watching. She tried to hold on to a shred of control, to preserve some semblance of dignity, but with each turn, another layer of her resistance crumbled. Evelyn felt herself slipping away, her sense of self dissolving into the depths of submission. With every passing moment, she became more disconnected from the woman she once was, the wife, the individual, and in her place emerged a creature of their making, a plaything to be used and discarded. The realization sent a shiver down her spine, a twisted thrill mingled with a chilling fear. The men's voices grew louder, their words crude and dehumanizing, stripping away the last remnants of her humanity. But Evelyn was too far gone to protest. She was lost in the intoxicating whirlpool of submission, too immersed in the pleasure to care. She was an object now, a plaything for their amusement. And the awareness of it, though humiliating, sparked a forbidden excitement within her. Her emotions were a storm chaotic, a blend of pleasure and shame, desire and disgust. She struggled to reconcile the conflicting feelings. The arousal mingled with humiliation, the thrill that danced alongside degradation. How could she find pleasure in this, in the very act of being stripped of her dignity? Yet, she did. The shame only intensified the experience, pushing her deeper into this forbidden realm. William remained in the background, a silent observer to his wife's descent into degradation. His expression was unreadable, a mask hiding the emotions swirling within him. But Evelyn could sense the darkness in his eyes, the twisted satisfaction that chilled her to the core. This was what he had wanted all along, what he had orchestrated with his silence and subtle encouragement. His arousal was palpable, deepening Evelyn's humiliation and betrayal. Her heart raced as she realized she had crossed a threshold, a point of no return. The weight of that knowledge was crushing, but there was a strange thrill, a forbidden excitement she couldn't deny. She had entered a world she hadn't known existed, a realm of submission and degradation that both terrified and exhilarated her. The darkness within her, the part she had always kept hidden, was now unleashed, and she found herself both repulsed and oddly aroused by her own helplessness. The night dragged on in an endless cycle of submission and humiliation. William's friends took their turns, each pushing Evelyn further. Her body responded despite the turmoil in her mind, the shame gnawing at her soul. She was no longer in control, no longer the woman she had been just hours earlier. The Evelyn who had entered that party was gone, replaced by a creation of their making, a vessel for their desires. As the night wore on and Evelyn sank deeper into the abyss, she felt an eerie detachment from her own body, as though she were watching the scene unfold from afar. The shame and pleasure, fear and excitement swirled inside her in a chaotic mix of emotions that defied logic and reason. The realization struck her like a thunderclap, a sudden awareness that the boundaries had been irreversibly crossed. The Rubicon of their relationship had been crossed. There was no turning back from the intoxicating pull of their forbidden desires, no escaping the path they had started down. Evelyn staggered into the sanctuary of the bathroom, the door clicking shut behind her, the sound echoing the finality of her transformation. The harsh fluorescent lights illuminated her reflection in the mirror, a distorted image that scarcely resembled the woman she once knew. This wasn't the confident, self-assured Evelyn who had entered the party. This was a stranger, a ghost of her former self. Her eyes were wide with a haunting blend of shock and emerging darkness. She searched her reflection for answers, for a hint of the woman she had been, but all she found was the stark evidence of her degradation. The phantom touch of their hands lingered on her skin, a haunting reminder of their violation. Their ravenous gazes burned into her memory, mocking her submission. And William, her husband, the man who had sworn to protect and cherish her, stood by, a silent accomplice to her humiliation. His tacit approval, his voyeurism, made her shame all the more unbearable. She had willingly embraced the shame, but now it overwhelmed her. She splashed cold water on her face, desperately trying to cleanse herself of the lingering touch of those men, to wash away the shame that clung to her like a shroud. But it was futile. The water mixed with her tears, tracing a path down her cheeks, a physical manifestation of the turmoil raging within her. The tears that streamed down Evelyn's face were a testament to the irreversible transformation she had undergone. There was no escaping the reality of her choices, no undoing the events that had led her to this precipice. As she returned to the room, the atmosphere had thickened. The air was heavy with a predatory hunger that seemed ready to consume her. Their gazes, once hidden behind a mask of civility, now bore into her with raw, primal intensity. They had tasted her submission, and they hungered for more. William remained a silent observer, his eyes dark with approval, his arousal blatant in its display of twisted desire. He reveled in her degradation, his silence a tacit endorsement of their depravity. The men, emboldened by her surrender, wasted no time pushing the boundaries even further. The fragile veneer of social decorum had shattered, leaving only a primal hunger in its wake. They demanded more, their voices thick with possessive entitlement. Evelyn, her mind numb and her body reduced to a mere vessel for their desires, found herself complying. Each command, each degrading act, was a step deeper into the abyss, a spiral of shame and forbidden pleasure from which she could not escape. She was a puppet, her strings pulled by their insatiable lust, her will dissolved into the intoxicating haze of submission. Then, the competition began. William's friends, driven by a twisted need to conquer and possess, vied for her attention, their perverse game escalating with every passing moment. Evelyn was no longer a person in their eyes. She was a trophy, a prize to be claimed. Her humiliation became a source of twisted pleasure. The shame was unbearable, yet her body betrayed her. responding to their touch with an involuntary arousal that both disgusted and thrilled her. She was trapped in a vicious cycle of degradation and desire, unable to break free from the magnetic pull of their depravity. One of them, his voice laced with predatory intent, suggested taking things further, pushing the game to an even darker level. Evelyn's breath hitched, a wave of dread washing over her. She wanted to scream, to run, to escape the clutches of their twisted desires, but her body refused to obey. Her voice was caught in her throat. They led her toward the bedroom, a dark, intimate space that symbolized her ultimate surrender, the complete loss of control. The bed loomed before her like a monstrous altar, a stark reminder of all she had already lost and everything she was about to lose. As they guided her toward the bed, a chilling sense of doom washed over her, tightening its icy grip around her heart. Evelyn could feel their eyes burning into her, stripping away the last remnants of her dignity. Her resistance crumbled under the weight of their collective gaze. One by one, each man takes their turn, pushing her boundaries and testing her limits. Although she fights to keep her composure, each act of submission drags her deeper into an abyss of despair, making her feel as though she is losing herself entirely. To Evelyn's loss of self and control, her mind becomes a whirlwind of confusion and despair, and her body, once her own, now moves as though controlled by others. Her will fades into a distant echo, barely audible amidst the cacophony of desire surrounding her. William, her husband, silently observes from the doorway, complicit in her degradation, relishing her humiliation as his presence looms like a dark shadow. Evelyn's identity starts to crumble as she realizes she is no longer in control of her own body or mind. Number 3. William's role in Evelyn's downfall. William, as the instigator of this cruel situation, watches as Evelyn deteriorates, silent and unfeeling. She is no longer the woman she once was, broken and stripped of her agency. The reality of her helplessness weighs heavily on her as the night continues, and she comes to understand there is no way back from the path she's been forced onto. The spiral of degradation has claimed her. The 4. The final act of submission. As the night reaches its climax, the tension in the room is thick and palpable. William's friends exchange knowing glances, signaling the final act of their depravity. The charade is over, and Evelyn's complete submission is the ultimate goal. They waste no time, their hands greedy, and their eyes filled with a lust that knows no boundaries. Evelyn's body succumbs to their overwhelming desires, and for a moment, she wonders if this is what it truly means to lose oneself entirely, to become nothing more than a vessel for the gratification of others. 5. Evelyn's internal struggle and betrayal. Her mind is a blur, thoughts fragmented and incoherent as each man takes his turn with her. Her body instinctively responds, betraying the internal conflict she feels. She realizes with cold clarity that she has relinquished all control. She is now nothing more than a puppet, her strings pulled by their unrelenting desires. Her own will is drowned out, lost in the noise of their lust, and she knows she will never be the person she once was. 6. Increasing aggression and deeper submission. As the night wears on, the intensity of their actions escalates. Their demands grow more insistent, pushing her further into submission. Evelyn's emotions become a chaotic blend of pleasure and despair, a nauseating cycle of arousal and degradation. With each passing moment, her sense of self erodes, and she is left as a hollow shell, unable to recognize the woman she used to be. William's participation and the ultimate betrayal. Just when Evelyn thinks she cannot bear any more, William steps in, his touch familiar yet cruelly foreign in this context. For a fleeting moment, she feels some relief, no longer alone in her degradation. But the truth that her husband is now a participant in her humiliation deepens the wound. The man who once promised to love and protect her has now become an active agent in her downfall, and the irony of this betrayal cuts her to the core. 8. Exhaustion in the aftermath. As the night finally winds down, the frenzy of lust that had fueled the men's actions begins to subside. Evelyn lies on the bed, her body marked by their violation, her mind shattered. The weight of her submission presses down on her, suffocating her spirit. The room grows silent, the cruel laughter of the men fading as they leave one by one, their expressions smug. William surveys the devastation he has caused, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he takes in the wreckage of his wife's soul. 9. The final realization. Evelyn's understanding of the depth of her degradation settles over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. She realizes her submission is complete, her spirit utterly broken. The man she once loved has turned into her tormentor, and their relationship will never be the same again. She is now fully under his control, a possession to be used and discarded at his whim. The crushing weight of this realization overwhelms her, extinguishing any trace of her former self. She is trapped in a new reality, one that she can never escape from, shaped by the horrors of the night's events.